The night sky of the alien world was full of smoke and light. Explosions flashed in the distance, shaking the ground beneath the boots of young human soldier Taran. He was only 20 years old, but the war had already made him older in spirit. His uniform was torn from crawling through broken streets, and his eyes carried the heavy weight of endless missions. He was part of a unit sent to evacuate civilians from the city after a sudden attack by raiders. The alien city had once been bright and peaceful. Towers rose high with glowing lights, bridges connected streets above the ground, and markets had been full of songs and laughter. Now it was silent except for the sound of fire and falling stone. Taran ran through the ruined streets with his rifle slung across his back, searching for survivors. His orders were clear: secure the main path and regroup with his unit, but his heart was never at peace when he heard cries in the distance. As he moved past a collapsed building, a faint voice reached him. It was soft and weak, almost lost under the crack of flames. He froze, listening carefully. Yes, there it was again, a child's cry. Without waiting, Taran rushed toward the sound. He climbed over broken stone and twisted metal, pushing aside heavy beams with his hands. His gloves tore, and dust filled his throat, but he kept going. Finally, under a pile of rubble, he saw her. It was a small alien girl, her skin pale with a faint blue glow, her eyes large and bright even through her tears. She was no more than 7 years old. Her small arms were pinned under a heavy block, and her clothes were torn. Her face was streaked with dirt, and yet there was something pure and innocent about her, like a flower growing through cracks of stone. When she saw Taran, she flinched, unsure if this strange human was friend or enemy. Taran knelt down and spoke in a calm voice, even though his heart was beating fast. "It's all right. I'm here to help," he said slowly, hoping she could understand. Her lips trembled, and she whispered in her language, words he did not know, but he could feel the meaning: fear, hope, and a plea for help. Taran pressed his shoulder against the heavy block and pushed with all his strength. The stone refused to move at first, crushing his muscles with pain. He gritted his teeth, sweat running down his face, and pushed again. At last, the block rolled to the side, freeing her arms. The girl gasped and pulled herself close, clutching his sleeve with small trembling fingers. Above them, another explosion shook the building, and part of the roof began to crack. Taran knew they had little time. He lifted the girl into his arms. She was light, fragile, yet warm against his chest. She hid her face against his uniform, gripping tightly as if letting go would mean falling into darkness. Carrying her, Taran ran through the ruins, dodging falling stone and leaping over fire. His lungs burned with smoke, but his steps did not slow. Every corner held danger, yet his focus was only on the child in his arms. She whispered something softly, perhaps her name, though the sound was broken by sobs. Taran could not understand the words, but he answered with the only promise he could give. "You're safe now. I won't leave you." At last, he reached the safe path where other civilians were being guided out of the city. A group of alien elders saw him emerge from the smoke, carrying the girl, and they rushed forward. One of them, perhaps her guardian, cried out in relief and reached for her. But the girl did not let go of Taran at first. Her eyes looked up at him, wide and shining. In that gaze was something he would never forget. It was not just gratitude, it was a bond, a silent promise that even across worlds, this moment would never fade. Finally, gently, he set her down and let her go into the arms of her people. She was safe now. Taran's commander shouted for him to return, and he turned back to duty. Yet as he walked away, he glanced over his shoulder one last time. The girl was still looking at him, clutching the sleeve of her guardian's robe, her lips moving as if whispering his name. He could not hear it, but he felt it in his heart. That night stayed with him long after the battle ended. The war would move on, missions would continue, and life would harden him further, but the memory of that child never left his soul. He had saved many in his service, but she was different. She was a symbol of why he fought, not for orders, not for power, but for lives that deserved to shine again. Years would pass, and Taran would grow older, his path carrying him across the galaxy. Yet in quiet moments, when the stars stretched endless before his eyes, he would remember the small hands clutching his uniform, the soft cry in the smoke, and the promise unspoken between him and the alien girl. The world of Arya had healed over the years. Where once smoke had filled the skies, now bright towers rose again, and the streets were filled with song and life. The people of her world were known for their gentle voices and glowing skin, and they worked hard to rebuild their lands after the long war. But even in times of peace, memories of the past lived on. Arya had grown from the frightened child once trapped in rubble into a strong young woman. She was tall, with silver hair that shone under the twin suns of her planet. Her eyes, deep and bright, held both kindness and strength. Her people now called her princess, for she was daughter of the ruling family and trained to one day guide her people with wisdom. She wore robes of soft blue, marked with symbols of her house, but beneath her gentle appearance lived a spirit unbroken by the past. She remembered the cries of war, the sight of fire, and the fear she once felt as a child. More than all, she remembered the human soldier who carried her to safety when the world around her burned. His face had grown faint in her memory, but the feeling of his arms holding her close, the sound of his voice promising safety, those memories never faded. Many nights she dreamed of that moment. She often asked herself questions: did he survive the war? Did he remember her? Was he still somewhere among the stars? Arya's tutors told her to focus on duty, not distant dreams. But in her heart, she felt his presence like a light far away. As years passed, Arya became skilled in learning the histories of many worlds. She studied languages, diplomacy, and the science of travel between stars. She learned to speak in calm words that could ease even the hardest heart. Yet inside, she held a secret wish that someday, she might meet him again. One morning, the royal court gathered in the great hall. The walls of the chamber glowed with soft light, and banners of peace hung from the ceiling. The king, Arya's father, spoke to his people and to the council of elders. "Humans have sent word," he said, his voice echoing through the hall. "Their ships will soon arrive in our skies. They wish to build new bonds of friendship, to share knowledge and peace." At this, Arya's heart skipped a beat. Humans! The word struck her like a spark. For years she had wondered if she would ever see one again, and now they would come to her home. Her fingers trembled slightly as she held her robe tighter. Could he be among them? The court spoke in whispers. Some elders worried, for they still remembered the war. But others nodded with hope, seeing a chance for unity. Arya listened to all, but her mind was far away, drifting back to the memory of that day when a human soldier had lifted her from fire. After the meeting, Arya walked alone in the palace gardens. The air was filled with the scent of flowers that glowed softly in the night, and gentle streams ran between the paths. She sat by the water, gazing at her reflection. "If he comes," she whispered to herself, "will he know me? Or am I only a shadow in his past?" She was no longer a child. She was a woman of her people, trained for duty, but the bond she felt was still strong. She knew he had been young then too, perhaps not much older than she was now. Did he rise in rank? Did he grow weary of war? Or did he leave the army behind? A small breeze touched her cheek, and for a moment she closed her eyes. She could almost hear his voice again, soft but steady. "You're safe now. I won't leave you." The days passed quickly, and soon the skies above her world glowed with lights of arrival. Human ships descended slowly, shining silver in the twin suns. Crowds gathered to watch as the vessels landed near the capital. Children cheered, elders stood in silence, and guards kept careful watch. Arya stood among the royal family to greet the visitors. Her heart beat faster with every step she took. She told herself to remain calm, to act as a princess should, but inside she felt like the child who once clung to the sleeve of a soldier. The ship doors opened, and humans stepped out. They wore uniforms of deep grey, marked with symbols of their fleet. Among them were diplomats with calm smiles, and behind them soldiers stood in neat rows. Arya's eyes moved across their faces, searching, hoping. For a moment, she feared he would not be there. But then her gaze stopped. There he was. He was older now, his hair darker and shorter, his shoulders broader, his eyes lined with the years of service. Yet she knew him. Even after all this time, she knew the man who had carried her through fire. Tyrion. She almost gasped, but caught herself, keeping her calm. He did not yet notice her. He stood tall among his people, his face serious as he looked across the alien court. He was a captain now, as she learned from the words of introduction, Captain Tyrion of the human fleet. Arya's heart swelled with both joy and fear. Would he remember her? She had changed so much. She was no longer the child with dirt on her face and fear in her eyes. She was a princess before him now, dressed in robes and crowned with duty. When his eyes finally met hers, something stirred in his expression. It was not full recognition, not yet, but a flicker of familiarity, as if his soul whispered to him of a memory long buried. Arya lowered her head in greeting, hiding the storm of feelings inside her. She could not rush to him, could not speak of the past in front of all. But in her heart, she knew this was only the beginning. The human soldier who had saved her years before was here again, standing only steps away. The bond that had once been sealed by fire and smoke was alive once more. The landing field was bright under the twin suns. Crowds of Arya's people gathered behind barriers, watching as the human ships stood tall and silent. The air was thick with both excitement and unease. For many, this was the first time they had seen humans since the war. Some were filled with hope, others with doubt. Arya stood with her father, the king, and the council of elders. Her robe shimmered softly, and a crown of crystal rested upon her head. Outwardly she appeared calm, graceful, and royal, but inside her heart was beating faster than she could control. She had waited years for this moment, though she never dared believe it would truly happen. The doors of the human flagship opened, and the delegation stepped out. Diplomats came first, their hands raised in greeting, their voices warm as they spoke the words of peace. Behind them walked soldiers, their steps measured and strong, their uniforms neat and shining. And among them was the face Arya could never forget. Tyrion. He looked older, his hair shorter, his eyes sharper, and his uniform decorated with marks of honor. Yet he was still the same. His presence carried a strength that drew her eyes instantly. Arya's breath caught in her chest as she watched him step forward. He was introduced to the court as Captain Tyrion, leader of the human guard for this mission. Arya's father welcomed the humans with careful words. "We open our skies to you. May this be the beginning of trust between our worlds." The crowd clapped softly, though some eyes still held doubt. Tyrion stood silently beside his commander, his face calm, his posture firm. To others, he was just another soldier, but to Arya he was the center of the moment. She studied him carefully. His gaze moved across the royal family and the council, scanning with the discipline of a soldier. When his eyes met hers, something shifted. It was not recognition, not yet, but a flicker of memory. His expression softened for the briefest instant before he looked away again. Arya's heart stirred. He felt it. She knew he did. Somewhere in his mind, the memory of that night lived, waiting to awaken. After the formal greeting, the humans were guided into the palace. The halls glowed with soft crystal light, and the air smelled of fresh blossoms. The council led the diplomats into the chamber for talks, while the soldiers waited in the grand hall. Arya walked among them with her attendants, welcoming each guest with polite words. When she stood before Tyrion, time seemed to slow. She bowed slightly in the way of her people, her silver hair falling across her shoulder. "Welcome, Captain," she said, her voice calm though her heart trembled. Taran returned the gesture with the sharp nod of a soldier. "It is an honor, princess." Their eyes met again. For a moment neither moved, as if the memory of fire and smoke stood between them. Then the sound of footsteps broke the moment, and others stepped forward. The princess continued her greetings, but her thoughts remained fixed on him. Later that evening, Arya sat in her private chambers overlooking the city. Lights of the capital glowed below like stars, and the twin moons rose in the sky. Her maid placed food before her, but Arya barely touched it. She leaned on the balcony, her mind lost in thought. "He is here," she whispered to herself. "The one who saved me. He has returned." She thought of his face when he saw her. Did he truly remember? Or was she only another royal figure to him? She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat. She could not let the chance pass. She had waited too long. At the same time, Taran sat in the quarters given to the human soldiers. He had removed his armor, resting for the first time since arrival. But his mind was not calm. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. The princess. There was something about her eyes, something familiar. He had seen many faces across many worlds, yet hers had struck a chord deep within him. He closed his eyes and tried to recall. Smoke. Fire. A small child with glowing skin. A voice crying in the rubble. And his own arms carrying her to safety. His breath caught. Could it be? The memory had been buried under years of missions and battles, but now it returned with sharp clarity. The Princess Arya was the child he had saved. He did not know how he was so certain, but he felt it. For a long time he sat in silence, remembering her small hands gripping his sleeve, her eyes wide with fear yet filled with trust. And now she stood before him as a woman of grace and strength. The next day, the talks between humans and Arya's people began in the council chamber. Taran stood guard with his soldiers while the diplomats spoke. His eyes often moved to Arya, who sat beside her father, her voice calm and steady as she joined in the discussion. She spoke with wisdom beyond her years, her words bridging the gap between the two sides. Taran listened, not just to her words but to the strength in her tone. She was no longer the child he had once carried. She was a leader, a princess ready to guide her people. He felt a deep respect for her, beyond duty or memory. As the meeting ended, Arya found a chance to approach him quietly. Her attendants stayed behind, and for a moment they were alone in the corridor of crystal pillars. "You looked at me yesterday," she said softly. "As if you knew me." Taran studied her face, his voice low. "I do know you. Long ago. I carried you from the ruins." Her eyes shone as she smiled, a smile both joyful and touched with tears. "I knew you remembered. I have waited years for this moment." For the first time since their reunion, silence was not heavy but full of meaning. The bond that began in fire now stood alive again, stronger than ever. Neither spoke further, for footsteps echoed in the hall. But both knew this was only the beginning. The soldier and the princess, once bound by a single act of rescue, were together again. And their story was far from over. The palace of Arya's world stood tall with walls of shining crystal that reflected the twin suns. Inside its grand halls, the humans and aliens continued their meetings, speaking of trade, science, and peace. To most, these talks were the heart of the visit. But for Arya and Taran, something deeper was unfolding quietly in the spaces between duty and ceremony. They had seen each other in the council chamber, in the dining halls, and in the gardens where the delegations walked. But their words had been few, hidden beneath the eyes of many. Still, with every passing day, the unspoken bond grew stronger. Taran carried himself like the soldier he had always been, calm, steady, and respectful. Yet when his eyes met hers, there was warmth, a memory alive beneath the surface. Arya felt it too. The years of wondering had ended. He remembered. The man who had lifted her from the fire as a child now stood before her, no longer just a savior of the past but a living figure in her present. She longed to speak with him more, to know the man behind the uniform. But duty and tradition kept her silent. One evening, when the halls were quiet and the stars began to shine above the city, Arya made her choice. She left her chambers dressed not in royal robes but in a simple gown of soft silver, blending with the night. She walked through hidden passages that only the royal family knew, until she reached a garden behind the palace. The garden was quiet, filled with tall trees that glowed with soft blue light. Streams of water moved gently, and the air carried the sweet scent of night blossoms. There she waited, her heart full of both fear and hope. Taran was on patrol nearby, leading a small group of human guards through the outer corridors. When the others moved ahead, he noticed a faint glow coming from the garden and stepped closer. There he found her, standing under the branches of a glowing tree, her silver hair catching the starlight. For a moment, he almost stepped back, unsure if he should disturb her. But Arya turned, her eyes meeting his, and she spoke in a calm voice. "Captain Taran," she said softly, "will you walk with me?" He bowed slightly, still the soldier, but his voice held warmth. "If it pleases you, princess." They walked side by side along the stream. For a while neither spoke. The only sound was the gentle water and the distant hum of the city. Finally, Arya stopped and looked at him. "I waited many years for this moment," she said. "When I was a child, I thought perhaps it was only a dream. That maybe the soldier who saved me was gone, or that he would forget me. But you are here. You remembered." Taran's face softened. He removed his glove and placed his hand gently on his chest. "I could never forget. That night stayed with me through every mission, every world I traveled. I saw many faces, but yours remained. I always wondered if you survived, if you grew, if you were safe. To see you now, strong and bright, it feels like an answer I had been waiting for." Arya's eyes grew wet, though she held her voice steady. "When I was small, I clung to your sleeve because you were my only light in the fire. I never let that memory go. It gave me strength to grow, to believe that even in dark times, kindness exists." Silence followed, but it was a silence filled with meaning. The air between them was heavy with unspoken words. They were no longer just a princess and a soldier. They were two souls bound by a moment of courage long ago, now reunited. They sat together on a stone bench near the water. Arya asked him of his life, where he had traveled, what battles he had faced, what dreams he once held. Taran answered simply, telling her of distant stars and long campaigns, of friends lost and victories gained. Yet through it all, he spoke with humility. He was a soldier who had done his duty, not one seeking glory. Then he asked her of her life. Arya spoke of her people's rebuilding, of the duties of a princess, of learning the languages of other worlds. But she also told him of her private dreams, how she sometimes stood on the balcony at night, looking at the stars, hoping that somewhere out there, the human who saved her was still alive. Their words flowed easily, as if no years had separated them. The more they spoke, the more the distance of time faded. It was as though the fire of the past had carved a bridge between them that no distance could break. At last, Arya stood. "There will come a day soon," she said, "when I must speak to my people not only as a princess but as their voice of trust. I wish them to see humans as I do, not as enemies, but as allies. When that day comes, I will speak of you." Taran looked at her with steady eyes. "I will stand beside you if that day comes. As I did once before." Her heart swelled at those words. She reached out and touched his hand lightly, a gesture small but full of meaning. His hand did not move away. From the palace halls came the faint sound of footsteps. Attendants were searching for her, and Taran knew he must return before suspicion grew. They rose together. "Thank you for walking with me," she said softly. He bowed, his voice firm yet gentle. "It was my honor, princess." As he turned to leave, Arya whispered, "To me, you will always be more than a soldier. You are the light that saved me. Taran paused, his heart heavy with feeling he could not put into words. He looked back once, their eyes meeting again, then walked into the shadows of the palace. That night, neither of them slept easily. Arya lay awake, remembering his voice, his steady gaze, the truth of his promise. Taran sat by the window of his quarters, staring at the twin moons, feeling the weight of destiny pressing upon him. The bond that began in fire had now grown into something deeper, something neither duty nor time could erase. But shadows still lingered. Beyond the palace walls, not all welcomed the humans. And soon, those shadows would rise. The night was quiet at first, but tension hung in the air. Arya walked through the palace corridors with a careful step. She had felt it earlier that day, a subtle shift among her people. Whispers carried through the walls, voices speaking of discontent. Though the world had been rebuilding, not all had forgotten the war. Some still distrusted the humans, and there were those who hoped to turn peace into conflict. Taran had been patrolling the outer walls with his soldiers, making sure nothing approached the palace. The humans had been welcomed officially, yet shadows lingered in corners and alleyways. Rumors of a hostile faction had reached both Arya and her father, though their presence was yet unseen. It was in the garden that evening that the first warning came. One of Arya's attendants ran to her, breathless and anxious. "Princess," he said, "someone approaches. Strange movement near the northern gate. It may be a scout." Arya's eyes sharpened. She had trained for moments like this. "Gather the guards," she instructed calmly. "Inform the council. And Captain Taran must be warned immediately." Taran appeared at the garden moments later, his uniform dark against the glowing trees. His eyes met hers. "What is it?" he asked. "A threat," she replied. "Possibly spies. We do not know their numbers or intentions. But we cannot wait." He nodded, and together they moved to the northern wall. Soldiers lined the paths, weapons ready, while Arya and Taran took their place near the gates. The twins' moons cast long shadows across the walls, and the wind carried the faint scent of tension and fear. From the trees and nearby buildings came movement, quick, silent steps. A group of figures emerged, cloaked and fast, trying to approach the palace unnoticed. They were well trained, but not prepared for the vigilance of the humans and Arya's own guards. "Stay behind me," Taran said quietly to Arya. "I will handle this." Arya shook her head. "I will not stay behind. I am not the child I once was. I can fight alongside you." He looked at her, surprised, but he saw the determination in her eyes. He could not argue with that. "Then we do this together," he agreed. The hostile faction struck suddenly, moving to create chaos. Soldiers rushed to meet them, and sparks of energy flashed as defensive weapons activated. Arya and Taran advanced, moving with precision and coordination. They had trained for moments like this, though nothing could fully prepare them for the intensity of real danger. Taran moved quickly, blocking a scout who tried to pass him. His hands were steady, his voice firm as he commanded the humans and alien guards alike. Arya was beside him, using her agility and skill to block the attackers, her calm voice giving orders to her people. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Their movements were synchronized, as if they were not two separate beings, but one force working in perfect harmony. The memory of fire and smoke the day he had saved her was reflected now in the strength she displayed. She was no longer the child who had clung to his sleeve. She was a leader, a warrior, a princess who could command the respect of soldiers from both worlds. The attackers tried to retreat, but the combined forces of humans and aliens pressed forward. Taran grabbed one of the cloaked figures before they could escape, holding them until the guards restrained them. Arya moved to block another path, using her knowledge of the palace layout to corner the intruders. Finally, the threat was neutralized. The attackers had been driven away, though not without leaving the palace shaken. Arya and Taran stood together in the garden, breathing heavily from exertion. The guards looked to them with admiration, not just for their skill, but for their courage and leadership. "You handled that well," Taran said, his voice low but sincere. Arya smiled faintly. "So did you. We work well together." He looked at her closely. "You have grown so much since I last saw you. You are no longer the little girl I carried from the rubble. You are extraordinary." She felt a warmth in her chest. "And you have always been brave. You saved me when I had no hope. Even now, you stand here protecting everyone." They walked back toward the palace, side by side. Their people watched in silence, realizing for the first time that the humans were not just outsiders, but allies. The bond between the soldier and the princess had become a symbol, a sign of trust that could inspire unity. Once inside the palace, the council gathered quickly to assess the situation. The king spoke with calm authority, praising both Arya and the humans for their swift and decisive action. "Tonight shows that courage and unity are stronger than fear," he said. "These humans have proven their loyalty, and our princess has proven her strength. Together, we can face any threat." Arya felt a quiet pride, but she also felt the weight of responsibility. The attackers were only the beginning. Other forces, hidden in the shadows, would not be content to allow peace. Yet she knew she would not face them alone. Taran was beside her, as he had been years ago, and now they stood as equals, protectors of their people, bound by history and destiny. Later that night, Arya and Taran met quietly in the garden once more. The city was calm, but the air still carried the memory of danger. They spoke softly, planning for possible threats and sharing their thoughts on how to strengthen trust between humans and aliens. "You were fearless tonight," Arya said. "I feared for you, but I also feared for what might happen if I did not act." Taran shook his head. "You acted with wisdom and courage. You did not let fear rule you. That is what makes a true leader." Their hands brushed lightly, a silent reminder of the bond that had begun long ago. They did not speak of feelings yet, for there was still work to do, but both knew that their connection had deepened. As the moons rose higher in the sky, Arya looked at Taran and whispered, "I am glad you are here. I am glad fate brought you back." Taran nodded, his eyes reflecting the soft light. "And I am glad to be here, with you, to make sure no harm comes to your people or to you." The night passed quietly, but both felt the truth of their bond. The shadow of the past had returned, but together, they had faced it and proven their strength. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time, they knew they would face it as allies, as equals, and as friends who had found each other again. The city had been calm for only a few days after the attack, but the quiet was deceptive. Arya stood in her chambers, overlooking the glowing streets below. Her hands rested lightly on the balcony railing, and her mind was filled with thoughts of the future. The humans had proven themselves as allies, but not all in her world welcomed them. Some still held old fears and doubts, and Arya knew that trust was fragile. Taran had returned to his quarters after coordinating the defenses, but he, too, sensed that a larger challenge was coming. The attackers from the North Gate were only scouts. The real threat was hidden, waiting for the right moment. Both Arya and Taran understood that tonight, peace could be tested in ways they could not yet predict. Later in the evening, the palace council gathered to discuss security measures. Arya stood beside her father, her silver hair catching the glow of the crystal chandeliers. The elders voiced their concerns, some hesitant to fully trust the humans. Arya listened patiently, her mind sharp and focused. She knew that fear could blind even the wisest leaders, but she also knew that courage could inspire hope. "Trust is not given lightly," she said, her voice calm yet firm. "But it is necessary for the survival of our world. Humans have come not to take, but to share. We must see them as allies, not enemies." The room fell silent. The king nodded slowly, showing quiet approval. Taran, standing at the side of the council, met her gaze. His expression was steady, but his eyes carried understanding. Together, they were more than a soldier and a princess, they were a symbol of hope, a living proof that courage and loyalty could unite worlds. Suddenly, a warning alarm echoed through the palace. The crystal walls vibrated with the sound, alerting everyone that danger approached. Soldiers moved quickly, and Taran stepped forward, signaling his team to follow. Arya's heart raced, but she did not hesitate. She had trained for such moments and would not allow fear to dictate her actions. The attackers had returned, larger in number and more organized than before. They sought to create chaos, aiming to make humans appear as invaders to the people of Arya's world. Their plan was clever, but not perfect. Taran and Arya coordinated the defenses swiftly, their movements precise and synchronized. "Captain," Arya said, her voice calm, "we must protect the citizens, but we cannot let them see us divided. Our people must witness unity." Taran nodded. "Agreed. We move as one." They led a group of human soldiers and alien guards toward the outer courtyard, where the attackers had gathered. Sparks of energy flew, weapons clashed, and the night air filled with tension. Arya moved with agility and precision, guiding her people to safety while deflecting attacks. Taran was beside her, a pillar of strength and courage. In the midst of the battle, one of the cloaked figures attempted to separate Arya from Taran. They aimed to target her specifically, hoping to break the bond between human and alien. But Arya was not the child she once had been. She twisted and leapt with skill, avoiding danger and standing firm beside Taran. "Together," she said, her voice low but strong. Taran grabbed her hand briefly, a signal that they would not be divided. They fought side by side, their combined strength inspiring their soldiers. The attackers faltered under the unity of their defense. Arya's people saw that humans were not enemies, but protectors alongside them. After a tense struggle, the attackers were driven back. The palace stood, unharmed, and the citizens began to emerge from hiding. They looked at Arya and Taran with awe, seeing not just a princess and a soldier, but two leaders who had faced danger together and remained steadfast. In the aftermath, Arya and Taran walked through the courtyard, checking on their people. Soldiers tended to the wounded, and citizens whispered words of gratitude. The bond between the two worlds had grown stronger in that single night. Arya stopped near a fountain, her silver hair catching the light of the twin moons. Taran approached her, his uniform scuffed and his hands tired, yet his eyes remained focused and calm. "You have grown beyond imagination," he said softly. "You did not just defend your people, you inspired them." "And you," Arya replied, "stood by me as you did before. I could not have done it without you." They stood in silence for a moment, their hands brushing slightly. The bond of trust and loyalty between them had deepened, and each knew that the future of peace rested on more than just skill in battle. It depended on unity, understanding, and courage. The council gathered afterward to assess the situation. Arya spoke with quiet authority, explaining the strategy and emphasizing the importance of working with humans rather than against them. The elders nodded, slowly realizing that the partnership between the two worlds was not only possible but essential. Taran remained by her side throughout the council. He answered questions, offered insight from a soldier's perspective, and reassured the people of Arya's world that humans could be trusted. His calm presence strengthened her words, showing that unity was more than a promise, it was real and achievable. Later, Arya and Taran met privately in the palace garden. The danger had passed for now, but both knew that challenges would return. They spoke quietly, sharing their thoughts and hopes for the future. "You were right to stand with me," Arya said. "Tonight showed that our people can trust humans, but we must continue to prove it every day." Taran nodded. "And I will. As long as I am here, I will ensure that no harm comes to you or your people." Arya smiled faintly, her eyes shining with both relief and determination. "We make a strong team. I never imagined I would find someone who understands me so completely." "And yet," Taran said, his voice steady, I have always understood you, even when you were a child. That night, when I carried you to safety, I knew you were destined for greatness. And now I see it with my own eyes. They walked together along the path, the twin moons casting soft light over them. The bond that began years ago in fire and smoke had now grown into a connection of loyalty, trust, and shared purpose. The shadows of the past had returned, but together, they had faced them and emerged stronger. Both knew that peace was fragile, and threats would come again. But they also knew that united, they could overcome any challenge. Their courage and loyalty had inspired their people, proving that humans and aliens could work together, not as enemies, but as allies. The night deepened, and the city slept, knowing that their protectors were vigilant. Arya and Taran stood side by side, ready for whatever the future might bring. The past had shaped them, but the present gave them strength. And in that strength, they found hope for themselves, for their people, and for a future built on trust and courage. The twin moons of Arya's world shone brightly over the palace. The city was peaceful now, the echoes of battle long behind them. The attack had been repelled, and the citizens felt safer than they had in years. For Arya, the relief was more than just for her people, it was personal. She had survived, and so had the bond that had begun years before with a single act of courage. Taran stood beside her on the palace balcony, overlooking the city below. He had removed his armor and sleeves were rolled up, but the presence of a soldier was still in his posture, strong, steady, and vigilant. Yet tonight, the tension of duty was softened by the quiet beauty of the moment. "You have done more than protect the city," Arya said softly. "You have shown our people that humans are not enemies. That they can be trusted." Taran turned to her, his dark eyes reflecting the soft light of the moons. "We did this together. Your courage inspired your people, and it inspired me as well." Arya smiled faintly, brushing a strand of silver hair from her face. "I sometimes wonder if the child you saved all those years ago could have imagined this day." "You?" Taran asked, a gentle smile forming on his lips. "She was strong even then. She trusted me when there was nothing left to hold on to. That trust gave me purpose. And now, she has become even stronger." The memory of that night, the fire, the smoke, the weight of a small life in his arms still lived in Taran's heart. Now, seeing Arya as a grown woman, wise, brave, and radiant, he understood that she had fulfilled the promise of that moment. She had become a light for her people, just as she had been a spark of hope for him. The palace gardens were quiet, filled with glowing trees and gentle streams. They walked among the blossoms, speaking quietly about the future. Talks of alliances, trade, and joint missions were still ahead, but for now, they allowed themselves a moment of peace. "You never forget," Arya said softly, glancing up at him. "Even when everything around you changed, you remembered me." Taran nodded. "Some memories shape a person more than anything else. That night, it reminded me why courage matters. Why kindness matters. Why protecting others matters. I could never forget you." She reached out and lightly touched his hand. The contact was simple, but it carried the weight of years and unspoken emotions. "And now, you are here," she said, "not as a soldier carrying me from fire, but as someone who stands beside me, in peace and in trust." Taran's hand closed over hers briefly, a quiet affirmation. "I am here," he said. "And I will be here, no matter what comes." The citizens of the city began to celebrate in the streets below. Music and laughter filled the air, a sign that peace had returned. Arya and Taran watched from above, their hands still brushing together, feeling the satisfaction of safety restored. But they also knew that peace was not simply the absence of conflict, it was the presence of trust, and trust had been built not only through words but through action. "You have done something extraordinary, Arya," Taran said. "Not just saving your people tonight, but showing that unity is possible. Humans and aliens, together." She smiled, feeling both pride and humility. "I could not have done it without you." You remind me that courage is not alone, it is shared. That even when the world seems divided, unity can exist. Taran looked at her closely. And it is shared between us, too. That bond began long ago, in fire and smoke, and it has grown stronger every year. I hope you feel it as I do. Arya's eyes reflected the light of the moons and the glow of the city below. I do, she said simply. I have always felt it. And now, I know that together, we can face anything. They walked to the edge of the balcony, looking out at the horizon where the twin suns would rise soon. For a moment, the world seemed infinite, full of possibility. The past had shaped them, but the future was theirs to decide. You once carried me to safety, Arya said softly, and now, you stand with me in strength. The child you saved has grown, but the bond between us remains. Taran smiled, his gaze steady. And I will continue to stand with you, Arya. Not because of duty, but because of what we share. That bond is more important than orders, more important than fear. It is trust. It is loyalty. And it is friendship that will never break. Arya leaned slightly closer, feeling the quiet power of the moment. Then let us face the future together. For our people, for our worlds, and for the promise that began years ago. Taran nodded. Together. Below them, the city shimmered with life. The citizens celebrated not just the safety of the palace, but the unity of two worlds. Humans and aliens mingled, shared stories, and laughed. Children ran through the streets, inspired by the courage and trust displayed by their leaders. Arya and Taran remained on the balcony, quiet witnesses to the world they had helped shape. Their past had brought them together, and their present strengthened the bond that would guide the future. The night grew still, but the feeling of hope remained. The twin moons shone brightly, and the stars stretched across the sky, endless and full of possibility. For the first time in many years, Arya and Taran felt truly at peace. They had faced danger, uncertainty, and the shadows of fear, but they had emerged together. I never thought, Arya whispered, that a single act of kindness could change so much. It can, Taran replied. Even a small act can shape lives, and even the smallest bond can grow into something extraordinary. That night, I carried you to safety. Tonight, I stand with you, as an equal, and I will do so for all the days to come. Arya's heart filled with warmth. The city, the people, and the stars above all seemed to shine brighter. The child she had once been and the woman she had become were joined by the presence of the human who had once saved her life. Together, they faced the future, ready to protect their worlds, to build trust, and to honor the bond that began in fire and smoke. The night was quiet, but it was alive with hope, courage, and the promise of a shared destiny.